You're listening to the Institute of Commissioning and Assurance, where commissioning isn't a phase, it's project leadership. Unlock the systems-based approach that is reshaping delivery of today's most complex infrastructure projects, from energy systems to industrial processes to transport systems, plus much more. Say no to project failure and say yes to value creation, accountability, and successful project outcomes. Here's your host, Paul Turner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. We've got a fantastic group of individuals here that are going to share their expertise and really a first of its kind global roundtable where we're going to discuss some problems that are challenging all projects all over the world in all industries. And we're going to get some unique perspectives across the globe of how people are addressing some of these challenges. So I'd like to first introduce David Tain. David is the VP of Latin America and the chairman of our ICxA Technical Committee. David, why don't you start and set us up for today's discussion?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Paul. And well, in this morning, for you, good morning. I mean, this is 5:30 a.m. here in Calgary, Alberta. So about good evening and good afternoon for you guys in different part of the world. Paul, to me, it's a real great privilege to be here with you and be part of this first of its kind, as you mentioned, initiative that brings together all these professionals from all over the world. You're going to see that the panelists that we're having. So, and that's the thing. As a chairman of the technical committee, this is one of the key mandates that we established, right? So, to build these practices, to build these spaces of cross collaboration, right, across the world where knowledge is shared in all the industry as the markets advance and adapt to new business constraints, right? So one of the things, and this is driving this mandate and is steering it, is that across the committees we see across the world organizations face similar challenges, right? And what they do is they solve it in isolation, right? So this knowledge stays fragmented across regions, discipline, industries, right? So it gets totally isolated, right? So by bringing this collective intelligence, Paul, we analyze these challenges from different lenses, right? So and we induce creative solutions to these global common problems, and we induce also the emergence of best possible practices by the combining on this knowledge, which eventually also will feed the standards and will improve the whole execution ecosystem, right? So that's in one side. In the other side, we also steering the research agenda, right? So for the advancement of the profession as markets evolve, right? So this is actually one of the key things that I'm strongly believe. Knowledge is not static. Knowledge evolves, and we need to evolve with this. And that's one of the whole mandates of the technical committees, not to be stagnant, but also evolve and co-evolve with the business environment, right? So we're moving from what we call an isolated expertise to a shared intelligence at a global scale. And these forums are both knowledge sharing platforms and catalysts for innovation for commissioning, outcome assurance, and operational readiness, right? So ultimately, we want to deliver, to induce the delivery of safe, reliable, sustainable projects that end maximizing the value to organizations, right? So that's essentially, the base of all these committees, the mandate of the technical committees, and these ICxA global knowledge roundtables, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, I have the great privilege to be part of the first one. And without more delay, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Today, we have 6 panelists from all different corners in the world. We have Andres Mesa joining us from the United States. He's a commissioning professional with over 15 years experience in the oil and gas industry. We have joining us from the Netherlands, we have André Goossens, who has over 2 decades of experience in bioenergy and oil and gas assets. Wellington Colombo joining us from Brazil. I was actually a couple of weeks ago there. He has 2 decades experience in mining and renewable energy projects. James Tuller joining us from Norway. He has 20 years experience in land-based aquaculture projects. We have Jav from Qatar joining us from Qatar. He has also 20 years in experience in oil and gas projects and operating assets. And from China is joining us Jason. Jason Miao has over 20 years in processing services in the energy sector. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for making the time. and I'm very excited to see you guys here. And without more delay, we're gonna start with the first question. So before we start, the format for the people that is recently joining us, the format is we're gonna post questions to the panel. Each panelist is going to have 2 minutes to respond the question and share their perspective based on their industry and their personal experiences and their discipline, right? So, without more delay, the first question, we're going to start with Andres. What has been your experience with projects being ready to start versus ready to operate? And particularly with that, Andres, can you share any results you've seen when organizations assume readiness and start up instead of proving it?
Thank you, David, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very excited to be part of ICxA, so this is great space. So what I've seen is a lot of projects there. They say they are ready to start, but being truly ready for operate is a whole different ballgame. Yeah, so the gap and that gap is where most of the risk resides. In my experience, ready to start is often defined as construction completion or mechanical completion milestones where systems are handed over, all documentation is in place or large in place, and there is a general belief that operations can take it from there. Yeah. But to say that you are ready to operate, it means much more than that. Yeah, it actually means that you need fully validated systems, trained operators, proven procedures, integrate testing, and prove that everything's going to run safely and reliable right from the get-go. So when organizations assume that they are good to start up without really checking everything through a solid commissioning and operation readiness process, we start seeing all these issues popping up quite fast. No, now you're dealing with shutdowns, you're having to redo work or even safety incidents, all because system weren't fully function tested or interfaces weren't properly validated, right? This often results in delay on schedules and rising costs, etc. So when teams do actually take the time to prove that they're ready to operate through integrated system testing or and operational readiness assessments, defining clear acceptance criteria, that's when startups they go smoother. There is a faster ramp up to capacity, and there is not as many surprises as you typically find out no proper tested plans. No. So for us and for me is that the key lesson is that startup is not just the test, it's actually the confirmation that everything's ready to go. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Andres.
Yeah.
How about you from the Netherlands? Andrea Goosens, what is your perspective?
So, switching on, I already lost 8 seconds, so I
There you
need to
go.
be very quick.
No, 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 necessarily. Just share.
So, to me, the question is even earlier. If there is a discussion at the moment, what is ready to operate or what is ready to start up? There's a huge difference between those two, and in my world, I'm always with my people there, even before that arises. We do the FATs, we go to the factories, we accept, we release something for being ready to ship to site. All of that should be part of the mandate of the people doing commissioning. You are on site on a daily basis. You look what the status is. You know what the status is, and if you have a very nice commissioning strategy document, there you will also have all your definitions of what am I doing at what moment, what is happening. My team and myself are the people deciding when it is mechanical complete, when do we want to take it over from construction, uh, when are we trying to hand it down to operations, and it's not sooner earlier than that moment. So yes, there is a real within companies a real insight in where management thinks they are ready to operate and when in the real world, we know they are ready to operate. So,
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Andre. Let's move on to Brazil, Wellington.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Well, as everybody is saying, the most important lesson for me is startup and operation readiness are completely different things. Although most of the people still has a misconception about that. In my experience, projects are very good in delivering assets, but operations, they don't consume assets. They consume stable production, reliability, safety, and something this kind of thing get a little confused. So what is critical when something is missing after the handover? Huh? We don't have trained operation, we don't have integrated maintenance routines, and this cause a lot of problems that our colleagues said. Costs, delays in achieving the throughput of the plant, things like that. I think that this the most important thing, to separate the things and to put some things before the commissioning. Because when the project finishes and the ramp up starts, normally you have a crisis if the things are not already in place. So because of that, it's very important to separate a team only dedicated to operational readiness instead of only having the operations and the projects. I think this is the most important thing. Okay.
Oh, interesting insights. No, thank you so much, Wellington. From Norway, James, how do you see this?
Hi, David. Pleasure to be here with you guys today. Yeah, with land-based aquaculture, you're dealing with live organisms. So you need to have a good understanding not only of technology, but also the biology, the biology of the end product, being the fish. And not having a good enough understanding of how those two actually function and work together can really gray the area between what is ready to start and what means ready to operate. In some of the projects I've been in, when you start to not understand where that boundary goes, you can't call it a handover, because all you're doing really is going into troubleshooting straight away. It should be a production phase, and it's a troubleshooting phase. So in my last employment, we actually added an extra stage to our cycle called Ready for Fish, so that even though we knew that technology was good to go, we also knew that the biology side was good to go. For example, the biological filter, the moving bed bioreactor that we had, required a couple of months to actually start up and be mature enough to handle the size of the load coming from the fish on day one. If that biological filter is not ready to take that and handle that load, you get a nitrite spike in the system, which can basically be lethal and kill the fish on day one. So you can fail quite easily on day one if you do not understand how your end product and the biology of technology actually hang together and work together.
Excellent. No, thank you so much, James, for that great contribution. Jab, how do you see that from your side in Qatar?
Hey all, it's absolutely a pleasure to be here today. And Middle East is actually the world center of energy, and some of the most significant energy projects in the world are there. And currently in Qatar, we have the world's most significant LNG project ongoing. And other countries in the region, all of them have these major projects. And I'm not going to talk about any specific project here, but in general, most of the project, when the commissioning is not in the right standard framework since day one, we will have delay, and this delay comes very expensive, and it comes trouble for operation later on. This is why that the ICxA can help and put the framework and the standards, and if that's followed, then the simple completion task comes to an outcome assurance. And right now we have the situation of the Hormuz and the war, so it makes it even more important to put a proper standard for commissioning to ensure you are not delaying the project to have everything delivered. And so by having everything since day one, from the subsystem definition, using the right framework, to the day that you're going to hand over to operations, if a proper standard is in place, then the success it is assured. So that's what I can say.
Well, that's great. And especially, as I mentioned at the beginning, not only is just different geographies, different industries, but also these significant different emergent situations, like what we're having in the Strait of Hormuz
Exactly.
and the war,
Yeah.
right? So we need robust standards and best practices across the world to deliver. And well, finally,
Absolutely.
Jason from China, what do you think?
I think for all the Asia project, there's two parts. I think number one is a lot of fabrication coming from all over the world, from North America, Middle East, Europe, are fabricated here. That's due to the fact trying to do cost saving. A lot of commissioning work was early down in those yards. Often because of the language issue and then different standards, that using a very basic example, lube flushing was not done properly, that when the modules shipped to the final destination, there's no proper record happened in the yard, that potentially the operator and the EPC has to redo the work, or down to the flange management that was not properly being managed. There's a huge amount of cost associated with if the tightening or the bolting was done into the level where the Middle East standard or the US standard in different ways. So there's a huge gap for the knowledge to be what's ready in this kind of conversation. And then you come with the international operator coming to Asia to invest into the likes of Papua New Guinea or Vietnam, where there's a significant amount of language barrier, local talent skill gap, and also be able to understand what it means by delivering the US standard or European standard. There's a huge need for the industry to talk about what commissioning standard or reassurance needed at this stage. So exactly like you said, what is ready? What's the definition of ready? And similar to some other people we were talking using different cases just now, that this readiness is very much indeed having a community to drive, to standardize, to have a same understanding. Because everything all of us know in commissioning is about communication. How you can communicate more clearly, regularly, to actually bridge the gap. I think that's huge, important for our industry to bring to the table.
Interesting themes emerging in this first question. And one of the couple of things that I can draw is the emphasis that operational readiness, outcome assurance, and commissioning are socio-technical problems, as we have mentioned progressively from the technical committees, and we're doing more research on that. Without a doubt, this is a socio-technical problem that requires higher other capabilities in organization. So, Paul, you want to take the second question?
Sure, yeah. So interested to hear everybody's perspective on commissioning really being the bridge to close the gap between ready to start and ready to operate. So let's start with yourself, Wellington. What are your thoughts?
That's a very tricky question, because many people think of that. Commission is the most important thing of preparing for operation. But many times, most of the technical conditions are already defined before that, during the earlier phases. And probably in the commissioning phase, it is too late to solve these problems and close the gap. So we should start much earlier with all this operational readiness process in place, the integration between teams, the interface solving problems, just to avoid to delay everything to the commissioning phase, because otherwise, perhaps there is not enough time to do this. People are very stressed with pressure of the schedule, and many times it's not enough. So when we enter the ramp up, things getting again in the crisis. So I think commissioning phase is a very important part of the operational readiness, but it's not the entire structure. We have to solve many problems before and to prepare to enter the commissioning phase. Okay.
Excellent points for sure. Preparing early is always critical. Next, let's hear from Jav. What are your thoughts on commissioning acting as the bridge?
Yeah, actually, in commissioning, sometimes, especially in oil and gas, that's actually operating. Especially when we are doing this, we call it service test. Lots of time, what we are doing in commissioning, we are operating, and we a lot of time when we are doing some of the tests is called OTP, operational test procedure. So basically, is very connected, and this is why it is so important that we have what is missing today in the projects, in energy projects, these standards and frameworks needed for commissioning to make sure that the safe commissioning is equal to safe operation, and successful commissioning is successful operation. When it comes to energy and oil and gas, is so critical, and basically that bridge is a very small bridge, is almost connected. So to give an example, people who are doing a lot of piping activities, before when we didn't have ASME standards, for example, that nothing was in place, and a lot of time we had problem with piping. But since ASME come to the place, the standards for piping, everybody follow the ASME B31.3 for hydro test, and since that, we don't have any problem for the companies who are following that standard. That's mandatory actually to do that. And that makes that piping comes ready to operate and safe. But commissioning and operation, I put it in the same thing. That's the same thing that, in the same way that a piping comes ready to operate by having a standard in place, a commissioning of the equipment of the project together, all together, a subsystem commissioning comes ready for safe operate once it's the right framework, and that's where ICxA can offer the help.
A theme I'm hearing lots, and I definitely agree, is for such a critical operational and safety process, a standardized method to get there is definitely required. So I'm interested to hear from yourself, James, in aquaculture. You kind of touched upon it in your previous answer. How does commissioning act as the bridge to close the gap?
Well, to be honest, I agree with Wellington, and a point that Jason touched on there, that commissioning is a bridge in the project, but it comes in much earlier. Commissioning is one of the only real teams that sees every aspect of the project. And it holds the civil contractor in the left hand, and it holds the operations team in the right hand, and it helps bring those two different worlds together, and it helps prevent all the project teams working in silos. So that also means that the commissioning team is not only the bridge that brings these different worlds together, but it also builds a communication bridge. So by bringing all these different worlds together, you bring everybody under the same roof to start to discuss what does readiness mean across all these different areas, and preventing these siloing to occur in the project. It helps bring out the difference between technical completion and operational confidence, where operations are integrated early into the project through commissioning into design phase, for example, so that they actually have a say in the design reviews. They need to operate it, they need to run it, they need to maintain it. So it's quite important that the commissioning teams involved in projects understand how they build that bridge to ensure that these different worlds come together.
That's definitely a good point for sure. Commissioning is really the bridge that pulls all the systems together, pulls all the people together to align systems and processes and people at the end. Next, let's hear from Andre Goossens. Interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, yes, we should be a bridge, but I see the commissioning teams mainly more as a ship where we be able to sail with several teams of people, and as a worst and last case resort, have a very nice emergency life raft that we can use to bring in some of the groups that we, how should I say it, lose along the way, that they are sticking behind, having their ducks not in a row, being convinced they are ready when it seems to all the world that they are ready, but at the moment that you then start talking with them, hey guys, come on, get your stuff together and hand over what you got, and let's see where we are. I see a lot of times on projects all around the world that, yes, we know we should be there, and yes, we know we should be in a project from the start. This is in most of the projects not even calculated in. And then you come there and you say, okay, I want to come in with a team of 3 or 4 people and look at what this status or that status is. Sometimes you're only even pulled into a project when construction is almost finished. I had one example where we were pulled in to do commissioning because an EPC contractor where we worked for before copied one of my strategies and replaced one type of industry with another and sent that to his contractor, to his employer. So yes, we should be there, but we should be there as soon as possible, really.
Absolutely. Excellent points there as well. All right, next, Andre Mesa, let's hear from yourself.
Yes, Paul. So it's definitely the bridge. Not only the bridge, it's a critical one. Yeah. So commissioning is the process to take a facility from being built to actually to truly being ready for safe, reliable, and efficient operations. So think about construction, fabrication of confirming that all equipment is in place, and commission is about proving that everything works, not only as an equipment, but as part of a bigger system. Yeah. And that brings a structure and accountability that everything is in place to perform the way it should under real world conditions, and that is safe for operations to take over. So commissioning is that bridge that brings operations and projects together, and it's a critical one and has to be considered as something that must go from the start, yeah, from as early as fit, yeah, where we are able to integrate both operation needs, operation requirements with project milestones or project goals together to get ready for or to turn over a site that is actually reliable and safety to operate. So the way I think about commissioning is to change the we hope we are ready into we know we're ready, and that's something that's critical for our operations.
Excellent points. I agree for sure. All right, Jason, what are your thoughts on commissioning as the bridge to close the gap?
I think we talk about the bridge. We talk about operations. I think we talk about construction. To my peers' point, those are hugely important. But I even want to bring a little bit forward between the design, where often people think, we're doing the basic detailed engineering. Why we need commissioning people in this phase? There's nothing on the plant yet. But I bet every one of us who's in commissioning for this many years would have the experience. When you are doing certain chemical cleaning, there was a flange that's not being properly done, or there's missing vents for the draining for steam blows, or there's no access for hydromilling, so you're left with section of the pipe that's not being cleaned properly. That can potentially cost you millions of dollars to repair the turbine downstream in the steam system. So I think this bridge is not just, we're trying to connect the dots from A to B, let's get the plant operating, but it's also about a longevity of what we are assuring the assets for the owners to operating those assets for long term without the huge impact in the financial later on. We are in the front end helping diverting some of the design issue, how things can be done more effectively to minimize those last minute change, last minute engineering, last minute pipe cutting or wire instrumentation. Those are hugely costly. Even just ripping down the scaffolding and insulations, those are huge amount of cost for this. So I think not just bridging the gap, but also we're inputting to put this gap close ahead of the time is a true really mission for the commissioning scheme institution to influence in the industry going forward.
Excellent point. It's almost like more than bridging the gap, it's kind of protecting the outcome right from the start.
Exactly.
So definitely appreciate that point. All right, David, I'll turn it over to yourself to bring up the next question.
Yeah, a few key insights that I've been taking from really interesting insights is when this bridge is weak, it's a risk materialization what is occurring, right? So, and in my opinion, this is all these risks are going to propagate and jeopardize, as you mentioned, Paul, the outcome of the entire project, right? So we're not delivering scopes. Beyond that, we're delivering outcomes, and that's essentially where the entire mind shift needs to happen across the globe, making sure that, yeah, we need to deliver effective and efficient projects. But at the same time, we need to avoid all these risks to propagate towards operations, which ultimately is the end objective, right? So begin with an end of mind. And keeping that end of mind across the project life cycle, and with that is the key topic of today, right? Which is, I'm going to build to that, and I want right now this question is particular to each piece of you guys' experience, right? So where we differentiate between ready to start and ready to operate. So based on your time in projects, what are the key aspects in your industry, in your projects, of readiness that only become visible when the asset was live? And more important, right now, with that knowledge, what are your recommendations? What are your views to surface them and address them early? Let's start with James.
Perfect. Thanks, David. Yeah, this is quite an interesting question, and I actually would like to highlight some of the parts of the contracts that I've seen that can be problematic, and that is around normal and abnormal commissioning, which can be a big oversight and a costly oversight, because it's not always the big technical problems that carry the financial risks. It's the small gaps that cause these big risks. So the easiest way to explain it is to have an example of, in one of the projects I sat in, we said to the project manager, we need to test this system on normal conditions and abnormal conditions. So normal conditions, 6 tanks, full circulation, full stability. Abnormal, 3 tanks. And how you actually bring stability by understanding which parts of the system needs to be isolated to maintain that stability. Project manager says, nope, abnormal conditions are not in the contract. We are only delivering normal conditions. Okay. Hand over the department. A week later, client calls up and says, hey, we have problems. We're using it with 3 tanks. We don't know how to handle the system to keep it stable. We're losing oxygen in the system. We have a couple of $100,000 worth of fish in here, and we need help to solve it. Couldn't solve it on SCADA. Ended up sending a commissioning engineer up who solved it in 10 minutes by doing a line walk of the oxygenation system and finding a manual valve that was open that should have been closed to isolate the system. He didn't know that because he didn't have any instructions or procedures to how to maintain stability by isolating parts of the system that weren't used. So the project had tried to save money using a manual valve instead of an automated valve that connected up to SCADA, and didn't want to do abnormal commissioning. So saving a couple of $1,000 ran the risk of the customer losing a couple of $100,000 in the space of a couple of days.
That actually emphasizes, the old adage says the devil is in the details. Well, to me, the devil is in the interfaces. Exactly what you explained, right? So, Wellington, let's just cross the Atlantic. Wellington, what is your perspective with that?
Okay, thank you, David. Especially in mining, perhaps in every project, but in mining you have the variability as a special issue that many times it shows up only after commissioning and startup. Commissioning and startup, most of the time you have a relatively under control environment. We have top management attention, we have the people, everybody is prepared, the order that is separated to do the tests are well known, but just after the startup, variability appears. And many times you don't have the fast decision making that you have in the commission phase with the top management together. We have a lot of new issues that appear on that. And to address that, to surface this kind of problems, it's very important to be prepared before the commissioning phase. So what Jason mentioned, to involve the commission team and the operation team since the early phase, since the design, is very important to run simulations, to understand better what can go wrong, the abnormal situations, because to be prepared only to the well-known situations is not enough to avoid the ramp-up crisis, as I call it.
You made a really important point, Wellington. I mean, you're absolutely right. We're from a project, we're coming from a relatively controlled environment to a live system that where sub-components are going to start interacting in ways that if we didn't anticipate, we're going to end in improvisations. And the effects can be from, losing a couple of bucks, a couple of $1,000, to have a fatality in the project, right? So the sky's the limit, and it's exactly that. Is the anticipation of these scenarios that is what matters. No, thank you, Andres. Let's Andre Gusens. What is your perspective?
Yeah, well, thank you, David. Quite simple. I have one nice thing that I always say, because we're trying to say whatever aspects will become visible. You can prepare for the magician. He can get a rabbit out of his hat. Well, you can prepare for 1,000 rabbits, but there will always be rabbit 1001 jumping out of it. So that's one of the things you should always keep in mind. As an example of that, we had a very large electrical heater, which we tested, which was sent, which was mounted, which was powered up. All of it worked, and never we could make the temperature that we needed from it. And at a certain moment, luckily it was in the fall when we were commissioning, it was already getting a little bit dark. We opened the box and we looked in the box, and at a certain moment we saw nice little sparks. And what happened in the end was that when electrical guys were mounting and installing and wiring this heater, at a certain moment they had all the wires coming from the electrical connection going into the heater itself, because it was a 300 element heater, which we could switch on depending on the demand. We found out that at a certain moment somebody had all these wires from the heaters dangling out of the junction box, and then wind hit the cover of the box and the cover fell over, and I think 70% of the wires were damaged. There was no way of finding this earlier than when we saw it, luckily in the dark.
It's really, really interesting, and the more I hear, the more I realize that, and the more reinforce the concept that this readiness is a function that takes assets from a what if to an even if, right? So to cover all the possible scenarios, and that's pretty much where the value is going to leak if we don't have this even if mindset that only robust readiness programs can bring. Jab, from your personal experience, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's again in oil and gas, especially in Middle East, when the projects are super large, the readiness aspects comes only visible when we are transforming from a construction site to a live commissioning and going live. Then we see all this how ready we are, and most of the time we are not ready enough. And by paper, everything looks fine. As we go through the project, we got this, all the handover documents, we call it RFC, ready for commission. Everything looks fine, but once we go live, then we know, are we ready or not? And I've witnessed many mistakes, especially in subsystem definition. In some projects, the subsystems were too large, and some other subsystems were too small in some other projects. And so the commissioning and startup sequence was not in the right framework to have a successful startup and be ready. And how we can make it ready, we can make this come to surface earlier. One thing we're doing, every project doing, they are doing these lessons learned. So we record all the mistakes from one project to another project, but that's not enough. We should have a proper framework and a standard to apply that can make the outcome assurance for the projects. And this is why we need this ICxA framework in these mega large projects.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Jason.
I think I touched points a little bit about how early detect of a certain issue, especially during the construction phases. During my time on site on the projects, I've seen pipes were anticipated for a air blow that was not welded together. And we were on standby for almost 2 months just for them to complete the welding on this pipe, which was already installed, surprisingly enough, right? Consider hydro tested. And then we've seen that, we were commissioning the last little 5 meters of the spool that was not able to access to the direct turbine. And we were on the last minutes of starting up the plan, and then everyone was pushing for the commissioning team saying, why don't we just sign off? And we find hammers and we find hard hats in those last 5 meters of pipe that we had to get it out and then proper commissioning. Otherwise, the turbine company wouldn't provide the warranty for it. There are many of those scenarios that, I believe everyone have experienced certain things in this scenario where we are, consider sometimes the roadblock of getting the plant started. But the reality is, if we don't do a proper job of identify those issues, that the clients are facing millions or even more of lost once the plant start up, and potentially hurt people and causing more serious issues on those sites. I think a lot of those comes with the deep experience from this group that we're talking not from a mechanical perspective, but also talk about electrical instrumentation, all the multidisciplines, how we can identify to work together and come up with a standard or procedure how to tackle those issues. That has huge value in this industry going forward.
Yeah, that multidiscipline view, that integrated multidiscipline view is instrumental, is paramount to ensure these safe transitions and making sure that, all these risks don't surface at the worst possible moment. And finally, Andres, from your personal perspective, right? So what have you seen that becomes visible once the asset is live, and how can you, help surface them earlier?
Good question, David. So a few come to mind, but I think system interfaces and interdependencies. So even if you test a system separately, when you start turning everything on and start working all together, a lot of issues just pop up. Issues with control logic or sequencing that are mixed up and they don't work well. Yeah. Also, we found issues on operability versus functionality. So just because the equipment works, it doesn't mean that it's easy or even safe to operate, or it's very difficult to do maintenance on it. So or even access to equipment. So that's another issue that we found when we are actually in a live operating site. Another issue that we have seen is people readiness. So even if we put people to training, when we put new people to actually operate a facility, you start finding that they are not confident enough. There is not enough real life knowledge or training to actually properly operate the plant. And another big one, it was mentioned before, is about performance and reliability at scale. So if we don't do proper dynamic commissioning, and we test the systems, but we don't push the system enough to actually see how they will behave under real conditions, or when they're getting close toward full capacity. Yeah. So solutions to that comes to mind to me is full system integration testing. You can achieve that if you have proper commissioning planning, early commission operations from the get-go in the project. Truly a strong dynamic testing on your systems to push the systems to real conditions as close as possible. So that works quite well with operators, is getting operators trained on the job by getting operators involved in commissioning. Yeah, so not only theoretical training, but actually bring operators into the commissioning team so they can live and get familiar with the process of commissioning, pre-commissioning, commissioning, and actually get really familiar with the site. Yeah, there are a few things that come to mind, David.
No, thank you. There's a great insights on this particular question, and we can see how different perspectives can shape, addressing global common problems that we have. Ultimately, we want predictable projects, reliable operations, and sustained value, right? So generation for organization. That's exactly what we want. And these kind of knowledge sharing initiatives assist and help organizations and the entire, as I mentioned, the entire execution ecosystem. Why don't you take us for the last question, Paul?
Last question here for sure. And after this question, once we go through all the responses here, we'll go through any questions from the audience. I see that there's some already in the comments. So as we're going through this last question, if you can think of any comments you want answered by this expert panel, please shoot them in the comments and we'll go through them at the end once we go through this last question. So this last question is, what is your approach to planning for readiness and proving readiness before the asset goes live? And maybe we'll start with yourself, Jason, because I know you've got some other commissioning commitments here. So let's hear your thoughts on this question.
Thank you, Paul. I think it's been a really good dialogue. I appreciate everyone here. I think one of the key words about commissioning is also proactive. We talk a lot about early planning, early engagement. I think all that comes down to proactive, get into an early stage of thinking about all the possible scenarios that could happened, and then set out a strategy or operating procedure to avoid those issues happening on later on. A big portion of that is avoid surprises, bring the project certainty, bring the reliability, bring the safety to the project environment. That should be the front center of a lot of things we do. Even, we talk about bridging the gaps, and that's being proactive to tackle what are the possible issues and what's the possible problems we're going to have. I think that should be the front center for what we are really doing here, which backs to the institution that we're setting up standards and giving different methodologies. That is based on all this, we have a decade of experience, 200 years of experience combined here between this group. That's to consolidate and then implement in the best practice to improve the project certainty in our industry.
That's a great point. Yes, between the expertise on this call and the expertise in the industry, the solutions and processes to follow to successfully complete projects, these are well known and well understood, right? And that's the role of ICxA, is to document this knowledge and expertise and share it with others so they can do the same and have successful projects, rather than often the cowboy commissioning we see at the end, where it's the Wild West and there's no controlled or methodical method to finish projects. So glad you brought that point up, is there is a proven method to do this, and we're documenting that and sharing it with everybody. 100%. So let's get your thoughts. Let's move on to Wellington. What are your thoughts?
I'm going to follow the same line that Jason, because there are some principles that are very important to start early and to measure, because operational readiness is not just a phase, an event at the end of the project. It's a discipline, a cross-functional discipline that should start earlier. And for all dimensions that normally we use, people, assets, processes, things like that, we should have ways to measure and to prove it, because it's very important. It's not just a matter of to have issues, something, to have some deliverables, but to prove that with objective evidence. That's very important. And the other point just to mention that is the governance, because many times we are very good in measure the progress of a schedule, the budget, and other things, but to measure the maturity of operational readiness, it's a thing that sometimes lack of attention. Okay.
You mentioned governance, and that's a key point, because by the time you get to the commissioning or testing phase at the end of projects, the success of the project has already been determined months or years in advance, right? Without the governance at the beginning of projects, then the damage is already done. Commissioning ends up just being the cleanup crew, right? But when you, like you mentioned, when you implement those standardized governance processes right from the start, you can guide the project to the outcome and make it so much easier and efficient to achieve your outcome with day one operation. So appreciate your comments there for sure. Next, let's hear from yourself, Jav. What are your thoughts on early readiness planning?
Yeah, the early readiness is very, very important, especially in large projects. And to have the readiness criteria for every subsystem has to be defined quite early. And by experience, we learned that we need to get the operation team involved quite early. And we have to have these readiness gates in place. Normally, we should always have operations involved to come to visit the subsystem at the time we call for an RFSU. Now, in oil and gas, that's ready for a startup. But with the lesson learned, we invite operations to be involved with us much earlier. Even before RFC, we have this discipline certificate. At that time, we do the walk down, we invite them. So back to what Jason and Linton said, we need to have this governance at quite earlier stage. And that's where the standards from ICxA comes to help to give this framework that we define the readiness of each subsystem, and also we put that together with the sequence of a startup. And when it comes to Middle East, at the end, there are many criteria that are unknown. For example, even before this war, we had this the sea transfer issue on the Red Sea, so that delayed things. So at the end of the day, you can even still face some issues with the readiness. But because we have those things, when it comes to technical commissioning readiness, we should have everything in place, because we cannot afford any more trouble in the process. So that's
excellent points. I completely agree. Yeah, and that's why ICxA is developing and providing these standards for projects, is because it doesn't need to be a secret on how to do this, right? There is processes to follow, and the processes and standards are available for everybody to see as well. All right, so let's move on to yourself, James. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. This is actually a really good question, because this actually touches on an area that in projects that I really enjoy, and that's project architecture. How do you set up the structure, the baseline, the processes to break down the project into manageable stages that everyone will follow and everyone will use the same language, because commissioning is a language, so that we speak to each other and not past each other. And it also touches on some of the other points that were made on maturity. So we, in the current project I sit in, we use the ICxA standards to develop a 5-dimension operational readiness model that covers system, personnel, processes, asset management, and documentation. We use those 5 dimensions to build a series of operational readiness gates where we can take all the different aspects of the project or make sure that the maturity of these 5 dimensions matches the maturity of the project. So that means by the time you actually get to startup, by the time you're going to go live, you've reduced that level of uncertainty in the project. Because if you're coming up to startup and you've got 80% certainty and 20% uncertainty, that is a whole ocean of uncertainty and problems that can arise. So if you can bring it up to that 95% mark, which is quite realistic, because you're always going to have a 5% of unknown uncertainty that you can't really always plan for or understand what's going to happen, you still have much better control in the project.
Agree completely. And I find it fascinating and interesting to see organizations like the ones you're working with, James, that have taken and embraced the standards, are implementing them at an organizational level and seeing the results of implementing those standards. And you're absolutely right that early planning from a systems-based perspective, we often don't see that on projects, right? We start with our traditional WBS that then moves into more of the construction AWP, and it's an afterthought at the end for a systems-based completions process, right? Where, like you mentioned, if you can set that up and establish your systems-based breakdown structure right at the beginning of projects, then that guides all of the early aspects of projects to align with what's needed for a systems-based completion, which is the only plausible way to finish projects efficiently is with a systems-based approach. So I really appreciate your answer. All right, next up is Andre Goossens. What are your thoughts?
Well, most remarks were already made, but I got a couple of points in this case, Paul. Thank you. What I normally try and do is when construction runs towards an end and they want to say, okay, we're done with construction, I'll see if I can grab one of the construction guys into the commissioning team. And on the other hand, what I will also pull into my commissioning team is one or two of the lead operators. And then that makes it quite interesting when you then see the discussion in planning readiness and proving readiness. Next to that, proving readiness. For me, the startup is part of my commissioning scheme. That's into my system. Even want to go a little bit further. The first 14 days, 24 hours a day trial run for me is still part of commissioning, because that's when the things come out that nobody really thought about. As an example, freezing of level measurements, that sort of stuff. We can think about it, we can work towards it, but certain things happen. Nature will always be there. We cannot escape the laws of physics. So you will find things whenever you're thinking of being ready. Think twice, be ready. We're getting back to Rabbit 1001. It is coming there again.
Love your analogies. You've had some great analogies on this discussion, Andre. Your rabbits out of the hat is a perfect analogy. I really like that one. All right, let's hear from Andres Mesa. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, for me again is about start early, and by start early I mean through the implementation of a structured framework to commissioning and operation readiness, something that should start from the early stages of the project, as discussed before, mature as engineering progress, there is better definition of construction, and as well as we get aligned with operations. So that to me is key, having this framework fully integrated also with operations and commissioning, just to ensure all of the operational requirements are there up front, and to work together to ensure milestones, sequences, extra priorities are clearly defined and then integrated into commissioning, into construction and engineering. Having this kind of mindset of end in mind, where you start early, bring commissioning operations early into the game, so you actually plan with the end in mind approach for your engineering construction too. Another thing that I think is key is to implement a proper completion management system and implement it across the entire project as a single source of truth. We found that as a key factor to make a project successful during the commissioning and start phases.
Starting with the end in mind is critical, right? Because that is the only way that you do have a single source of truth. Without that, then you only really find out the truth at the end. But of course, it's always better to know the truth earlier, because then you can actually do something about it. So definitely appreciate your answer. Excellent. So I see there's some questions in the chat. We'll go through those questions, and maybe for anyone on the panel, once I read the question, if you've got some thoughts on it, maybe just raise your hand and we can come to you, and we'd really like to hear your thoughts on some of the answers. So let's go through and see some of the questions in here. I'll be able to pull them up on the screen. So the first one I see is from AK Sharif. So he's commenting on ready for startup, initial startup by EPC contractor for commissioning, troubleshooting, and tuning, really ready to operate, meaning the operator owner is confident enough to be able to take over from the EPC contractor in all respect, including training documents, procedures, etc., based on my perspective. So that is really the key aspect of being construction complete versus really being ready to accept the assets from a system, from a technical perspective, as well as even just as critically from an operational readiness perspective. So who would like to add some thoughts on that one?
I can actually add that, Paul. I mean, as I said, it's as Sharif mentioned, right? So I would like to extend that. It's more than that. It's essentially, ensuring that all these scenarios are based. It's not only about training documentation. It's the integration of all that. It's what is going to move us from, a risk, a traditional risk analysis, which is the what if scenarios, to an even if project, which James very well mentioned, right? So there's gonna be always unknown unknowns, but without conducting this type of analysis, without conducting these, tabletops, without conducting these scenario-based, exercises, we won't be able to reach that. And not only, is as the key objective of the meeting today is ready to start. So yeah, we will eventually be ready to start, but not necessarily ready to operate. We're gonna start. We're gonna ramp up, and if lucky, we're gonna reach you're gonna reach the ramp up curve. But eventually, we want more than that. We need you to sustain operations. It's more than the training. It's the whole integration of that. What is going to ensure us a transition, a successful transition for a safe, reliable, and profitable asset, right? So that's, I think, to supplement that is not only from the silo mindset, it's just for the system-based mindset that is going to help us to manage the risk and anticipate, scenarios. That to me is about predictability in projects, reliability in operations, and sustaining value generation for the organization.
All right. If there's no other thoughts on that one, we've got another question here. Whoops, missed one here. This question is coming really from experience in the constant battle between the PM to overstep or value more of the project completion as construction than the commissioning process, which for them, commissioning doesn't have weight of merit. Now, we sometimes see this on projects, but when you look at the traditional project management model, I wouldn't even say that it's the project manager's fault. When you look at the traditional project management model that's been used for decades, it's really based on the deliverables of tracking scope, schedule, and budget. So they're doing their role. They're following the processes they're working within and the training that they've received, right? The issue really is fundamentally that they're working within a model that just does not produce project outcomes, right? And that's why both processes are critically important. We're not saying that project management isn't required. We definitely need our expert project managers to deliver the scope of the project, right, from a scope, schedule, budget tracking perspective. But then the process from there is really the outcome assurance, the commissioning, the operational readiness, everything that we've been talking today, to take it one step further from the project management world into the operational readiness world. So that would be my comments, is that when we're seeing battles like the comment is saying here between the project manager and the commissioning folks at the end, I wouldn't say it's the project manager's fault. It's just the model that they're working within, and the complexity of projects has just gotten too great that it's outgrown that scope, schedule, budget traditional project management model. What would any other thoughts from anyone on the line on that, or maybe some of the experiences you've seen on the tensions that might exist on site from some of the groups?
Yeah, I think also, a lot of project managers don't really understand how early in the process commissioning should come in. I hear quite often that, I don't want to hear about commissioning. We're so far away. Come back and talk to me in 6 months' time. And you're like, well, the ship has already sailed with problems if we're going to discuss this in 6 months' time. So it's really an education level to it, an understanding level to it.
That's true. Many of the projects, I personally myself always advised when we go to a new project that the commissioning should be starting even from the detailed engineering phase, because that's where all these subsystem definitions and everything gets ready. And it's very important to have commissioning in place since early to make sure the outcome is assured. And when it comes to the project management, they give more value, as the user mentioned, for construction, because the project management, they like to see these mechanical completions. They like to see the physical asset get completed, and this is how by their eyes they see the project is completed. When they see everything's in place, those beautiful structures go up, and everything gets in place. The mechanical completion, the physical assets are getting together. That's when they think the project is completed, and this is why this is that way. As Paul said, this is how it is. This is not like the fault of the project management.
Andre Goossens, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, it directly tie in with the Jeff saying, and what Paul's also mentioning. They are the project managers. That's what they're supposed to do. But be there in time and start building trustworthy relationships with these people. That's the only way of getting them on board. Otherwise, you will stand opposite one another, and the only thing you will do is fight and lose so much time on that sort of things. So be there in time. Show them that you're willing to support them. Help them in construction. That's the only way of getting them into your own boat that you need to cross the sea towards the nice and running installation.
Wellington.
Just previous to Mr. Andres, but one important thing is not a technical issue or a goodwill issue, is a governance model issue, in my view. Right now, a friend of mine asked for my help to help to construct a governance model to convince his organization to establish this operational readiness governance model since the start. He's running a shaft project in mining, underground mining, and he's taking this care to prepare the governance model before everything starts, because after what is completely different, it becomes a battle, as our friend said. So we have to think this before. It's a authorization, a mandate issue, actually.
And Andres, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, what I think though is, as a project, we cannot just put a blindfold about what will be the impact of handing over a plant that is not ready for operation. Yeah, any delays of commissioning, and then a startup has direct delays on having a plant in full operation, and a day of lost production could be significantly high when you look at it in terms of cost. Yeah, so you can just put a blindfold. We should probably think really about considering commissioning as a requirement of projects early on to ensure that we have a smoother and reliable plants when we are going to start operating them. Yeah.
Any other comments from the group?
Yeah, I get one other one, Paul. The main problem that I see is that construction is going wrong. They take more time. But everybody already promised that the plant will run at that and that date. So commissioning will always be the last one in the row with the less possible time to test whatever you want. That's why I say, for me, the startup is part of my commissioning. My trial run is part of my commissioning. That's when you find the problems, because you need your time. If they're giving them to you voluntarily, and otherwise you can take them automatically, guys. That's what it ends up with.
Yeah.
Very good point. Always we have this carry what works, a lot of carry what works comes from construction. That's true. That's a very good point.
Lots of interest in this question, and I think it highlights the message we've heard several times, right, is to start and plan early, because there's going to be challenges on projects, right? There's huge initiatives, and there's going to be challenges with procurement. There's going to be challenges with construction, but another point of this question is that relationships are key, right? This is only going to be successful when everybody works together and tries to solve these problems together, right? If we're going to keep working in silos, then we're just going to keep banging our heads against the wall, and there is going to be a constant battle, but that's not how we're going to get to success on projects. It's a collaborative effort, and everybody needs to be involved right from the start to solve problems together and work together to achieve the project outcome. So yes, appreciate everyone's thoughts on that one. Lots of great interest in that question. All right, next one is from AK Sharif again. Some of the contractual problems they're seeing, I guess, is pre-commissioning and commissioning budget is only 2 to 4% out of the project budget. So most of the contractors, especially EPCM projects, don't want to spend more resources to get that tiny amount. EPCM projects fail because of defining the scope as per the required activities, are missed out during bidding stage, and will make unnecessary delays and fights. So contracting is a crucial aspect to setting projects up for success, of course, because they define all the commercial terms of what's required and when it's required. And I guess I would just like to highlight that those contracts are only going to be successful if they have that commissioning governance input, commissioning technical input right from the start, right? If you're only going to focus on delivery in your EPC contracts, well, then you're going to get what's defined there. But if that isn't aligned with what's actually required for commissioning and the outcome, then even before your pen has signed that paper for the contract, your project's already in trouble, right? It's a critical function right from the beginning to align to the outcome and protect the outcome. So interested to hear your thoughts, David.
You know what, Paul? That's a question that hit home, particularly because that emerged as a debate when I was actually delivering a workshop in Mexico a few months ago. I was delivering a presentation about operational readiness, and of course, Latin American, as Wellington can attest, and Andres as well. Latin America is characterized by constrained budgets, constrained resources, and multiple variables that are unique to that business environment. So in the middle of the workshop, somebody asked me, how do you justify, the bringing an operational readiness effort to a project where, we're already, cash constrained? And the answer came very simple. Is exactly how AK Sharif mentioned, right? So between 2 and 4% out of the project budget, not the construction budget, the project budget, I would actually correct that. It represents commissioning and transition to operation. So that does not represent even the minimum contingency that you have to a project, which is normally between 8 and 10%, in some cases more on certain project 15%. So what is happening here, and as I've mentioned to that colleague that was asking the question that day, is that you're trying to save costs in something that is less than your contingency, yet is the most critical function in your project, because it is the function that is going to avoid you to damage a $20 million equipment, or cause a reputational issue in an environment because of a spill, or even worse, something irrecoverable, that the loss of lives, right? So you're pretty much trying to save costs in something that, in my opinion, is not the right place to look at, yet it is the most critical function that is going to not only sustain your project, to bring projects to life, but also to make sure that you deliver the outcome and your organization is not affected by that. So that is a really, really interesting comment. And more and more I hear, shave costs. Yeah, I mean, I'm pro, shave costs where it should be, but you're shaving costs in something that is not even the minimum contingency to the project, right? So interesting comment.
All right, some quick comments here, maybe some observations. I like the rock block. Maybe that was a comment that was made earlier in the discussion. I will use it. Comment here, how do I join the meeting? So this is a good comment. We're always looking for technical experts to join our panel discussions, join ICxA. So if you're interested in joining the group here and getting involved and getting best practices, processes, standards, procedures to save money and help your projects succeed, then this is the group to be joining. Check out our website, ICxA.net. Reach out to any of us on LinkedIn, email us, info@ICxA.net. We're looking for technical experts to contribute to the discussion, so hope to see you soon. Next question from Darren. Depending on the contract, facility type, and CSU O&M philosophy, it can be tricky to do full integrated testing without going into the startup phase, as you can often only take simulated operations so far and need to get into real and full operating conditions to fully flush out design or other issues. Absolutely excellent point, right? We want to do as much as we absolutely can to de-risk that process, but there's still only so much you can do, right? We don't want a catastrophic failure during startup, which is why we'll test on clean fluids, test on energized systems, and prepare for that moment. But if you haven't done any of that stuff, then the full operating conditions are really going to slap you in the face, because you're going to end up with some real catastrophic failures for sure. But as has been mentioned earlier in the discussion, there still are some unknown unknowns, right? And that's why we need to plan and prepare to be ready for those inevitable items so that we can react and not impact the project too significantly. Any other thoughts from the group on Darren's great question here?
Yeah, I already said, for me, trial run even is part of commissioning. And then we're 2 weeks in operation, so.
Excellent. I think we're losing Jav. There's some technical difficulty. Well, fortunately, it was at the end, the back end of the session. And then thanks. And if we don't join, I really want to thank him for the great contribution that we had. So
he's back.
Oh, he's back.
All right. Next question from Richard. Good coordination, interfacing, and proper integration and planning between construction and commissioning during mechanical completion and handover of the system to commissioning group is one key for successful commissioning of the plant on time and safe SimOps of the plant. Any comments on that question?
Yeah, I can put in my 2 cents here. I agree with that. And I think that also falls down to project architecture right in the beginning of the project, when you start to put in your handover management protocols into place of how you're going to handle that handover between not only construction and commissioning, but also commissioning to the operations team at the end. And how, depending on the project type, the level of SimOps extent, especially if it's a brownfield project and you're connecting into an existing facility, then the operations team really need to be in the driver's seat here and drive that SimOps procedure.
And one key comment, to supplement that, and James and Richard's question is the interface function, right? So interface function the same way that readiness, these are invisible functions. And reason why they are overlooked, because they're invisible. And they cannot be related one-to-one to construction deliverables or project deliverables or value generation. However, they are critical. So as I mentioned, the analogy at early in the podcast, I mean, to me, because I've been in this interface and readiness world so many years, I discovered that the devil is not in the details, it's hidden in the interfaces, right? So, and it appears in the most unexpected moments, right? So it's a really, really good question, really good comment. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, again, it's not just a matter of goodwill, because people have different interests and different behaviors under different pressure conditions. So I address again the governance model, because it's very important to define this early in the ideally in the design phase, because this solves a lot of future questions. Okay.
I think Andres has the hand up. Andres?
Yeah, I would say that integrations needs to start very early. Yeah. So it's very important for commissioning and construction to start planning very early on the project to make sure that our CSU sequence is fully embedded into the path of construction. When we talk about SIMOPS, understand what SIMOPS implies for both operations and construction when we are energizing equipment. That integration is to happen very early in the project, and that has been the key for successful on previous job that I've been when we start the integration early on.
Exactly. I will also add to what Andres said. I said that earlier, that by lessons learned at project to project, in the recent project, we get commissioning involved from the engineering, detailed engineering phase. And then we get operations involved from even before RFC. We invite them as an optional walk down, not a mandatory walk down. They are needed to be mandatory in RFSU walk downs, but we get them invited, volunteer, to be in early construction walk downs. So that interface integration, as everyone else said, should be from very, very early stages to be monitored and continued, so that contributes to the outcome assurance.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Now we've got 9 minutes left in our time here together. So we've got time for a few more questions. I can see that there's some really good ones here. So let's see how many we can get through in the next few minutes here. So question, how do you bridge the gap between unrealistic leadership expectations and schedule pressure when actual fieldwork signals potential startup concerns? So my quick comment on this one is that's really because there's a lack of governance standard that's required to guide projects to the outcome, which is why the ICxA has written our outcome assurance governance standard. That helps set some of those leadership expectations right at the beginning on what's required at the beginning of projects to guide them to success. But interested to hear from others in the group here on your thoughts on this question.
You're absolutely right. Paul is exactly what Wellington mentioned at the beginning, right? So it turns out to governance, but this is governance across the project life cycle. Governance needs to come from the front end, even before the inception of the actual concept, right? So really good. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, sir, I was just saying very short. Exactly by the framework and the standard for commissioning, that will address this. And that is what ICxA offers, to have a proper framework and standard for commissioning that will address the gap.
And understanding also that this is the more we realize, the more we're in projects, the more we understand that this is a socio-technical problem, right? So it is beyond the technical capabilities. That's where we by creating these capabilities to organizations, through governance, to readiness, to risk management, to all the integration of these functions, we are addressing not just a technical asset that is going to just push a button and run, but it's a socio-technical where agendas are going to be present, where I mentioned that in an earlier paper that I wrote a few years ago. Organizations are webs of actions and intentions that are only legitimized through governance. So that's the only thing. So we're going to make sure that circle back, everything points out to the governance aspect.
Okay, this next question is an interesting one from Dr. Basil Ali, saying that the implementation of Six Sigma processes and analysis for EPC and commissioning projects, you will professional results and project process excellence. So while I can agree with that for the construction process, I've seen Six Sigma applied with regards to construction, scope, schedule, budget, deliverables. I haven't seen anything in Six Sigma that addresses integration and managing a systems-based completion approach on projects. So I would say that's more of a traditional project management function, not so much an integration function for commissioning. What's everyone else's thoughts on the line?
I would personally say in Six Sigma, when we think about Six Sigma, which is necessary, without discounting, we're covering one really key and important aspect of the project. But it's as you mentioned, Paul, not only the traditional, but it is part. It is to cover the compliance point, right? So, and this is one of the key things that we need to understand as a global ecosystem is one thing is compliance, the other thing is completeness, and another thing is readiness. Understanding these key concepts is going to really make a difference in putting us in a ready asset, right? So Six Sigma is tremendous, and again, I've been involved in multiple along my career in multiple quality control efforts, Six Sigma effort. I mean, I really commend the tremendous contribution to the industry that Six Sigma, lean management, and all these other processes have done. Nevertheless, they are not competitive; they are complementary to the big scheme. So they are feeding this big machine of readiness, right? So yes, we have to ensure compliance. Yes, we need to have a level of completeness. Yet we also need to ensure that is sufficient but not enough to ensure readiness. So, any other comments from?
And I'll interject here a follow-up comment from Dr. Basil Ali on the same topic here. Use Lean Six Sigma process analysis for project phases from feed to startup. You'll professional results and including budget control. This will give you real-time controlling for KPI in each. But I think I'll agree with you, David, that they're complementary, but Six Sigma alone is not sufficient, right? The missing process pieces is really that transformation of the deliverables that Six Sigma would produce into integrated outcomes. So I think while Six Sigma does have its place and it is a fundamental aspect of project delivery, alone it's not sufficient, that more is required to achieve the outcomes on projects. Any other thoughts or comments on that one in our last few minutes here?
Oh, that's what you said is absolutely true, especially in the large projects. And I think from the first comment from Dr. Basil was mentioning APC. If I add that APCC, if we focus on commissioning and startup, absolutely, we need the gap to be addressed, and that gap is what we are trying to do with ICxA to address. It's pretty good Six Sigma, but it's not enough for the final result we are looking for.
Very good.
Yeah, and I think this added point here is maybe the key, right? Lean and Six Sigma, they do add big value to project management. 100%, I agree with that, right? But I think as we've discussed earlier, that the traditional project management model that exists isn't enough, right? That there's that missing component to take those scope, schedule, budget deliverables and transform them into outcomes.
Well.
All right, lots of great discussion. Appreciate everyone's involvement. Lots of great questions and engagement. I really appreciate everyone on our global roundtable discussion here. I think some really great insights that highlight the global challenges that are being experienced on all projects in all industries all over the world, and how ICxA is helping to bridge some of those gaps to help projects succeed. So any closing comments or anything from the group that anyone wants to add before we conclude for today?
Yeah, I would personally want to thank the panel, right? So I'm really thrilled to the results and the great contributions of the panel, and more than thrilled, grateful. I'm excited for the next ones to come down, right? So as you can see, today we touch a lot from different perspective, solving common problems together, right? So because at the end of the day, we're all together on this, and it's only through this cross-pollination of knowledge that we're going to improve the whole execution ecosystem to deliver outcomes. That's exactly it. So again, thank you so much for your contributions, and looking forward for the next ones. I mean, I'm really, really excited for the next roundtables and the next questions, the next problems that we're going to tackle together.
Thanks all, and I just I invite all the audience that reach out to us in LinkedIn and try to get a membership. You're gonna boost your career in commissioning. You make a difference, and once you read our standards and the documents we provide and the results we provide, you will see the difference.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, really appreciate everyone's comments and involvement today, and really wish everyone successful projects. Reach out to ICxA if there's anything that we can do to help. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
all.
Bye-bye,
everybody.
people. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Are you ready to lead infrastructure projects with purpose and accountability? Join the movement at ICxA.net and unlock exclusive resources from global standards to project delivery reform and career development certification programs. Visit ICxA.net for more information.